10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 205. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 205 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Welcome back in. As always in these crazy times, we hope you are staying happy and healthy and taking care of yourself out there. So today we are going to continue our series on the Bebop scale, and we're going to start putting it over a tune and talk about some exercises that you can do. But before we jump into the episode, I've got some people to thank that have signed up for Patreon. Just a reminder, you can get the PDF to every single episode that we've ever done by signing up for Patreon. And you could do that by going to 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, and getting signed up to pledge $3 a month. And you get all sorts of really cool benefits for that. In fact, we just put out our April ear training podcast. So that is live and ready to go. And when you sign up, you get instant access to all that stuff. So got some people to thank. Thank you to Claire, Mike, Rodrigo, David, Phoebe, and Preston. Thank you all so much for signing up to support the show, keep things going, and get a lot of awesome jazz materials in return. All right, let's jump into today's episode. Now, before we dive into this week's material, I did want to make a really quick correction from last week's episode. And thank you to David for pointing this out to me in the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group. When I was asking you to start on the root, third, fifth, and seventh and practice all of your bebop scales from each one of those chord tones, what I failed to mention is on a major bebop scale, so a bebop scale that's used over a major 7 chord or a major 6 chord, you have to start on 1, 3, 5, and 6. It just doesn't work if you start on the 7th. So if that was a head scratcher for you, that is my fault. I forgot to tell you that on major scales, it's a 6 because the passing tone is between 6 and 5. So quick correction, and thank you to David for pointing that out to me. All right, so this week, what we are going to do is we're going to put some of these scales into action. And we're going to do that by using 5-note segments from the bebop scale. So we need to be able to fit these into a measure, and a 5-note segment is perfect because what it does is it connects 3 chord tones basically. So think about it. If you start on the 3rd and you go down and you do 5 notes, that's going to bring you down to the 7th, right? If you start on the 5th and come down, that's going to bring you all the way to the root. So this is a really good way to practice our bebop scales in the context of a tune, in actual changes, because these 5-note segments, they really fit very nicely into each measure. So the tune that we're going to be using this month to explore bebop scales is In a Mellow Tone, the great Duke Ellington composition. And this is the tune that we're going to write our etude over at the end of the month. I really like this tune because the changes are spread out a little bit. So there's only 1 chord per measure, which makes it a really nice tune to start working over these segments in these bebop scales with. Also has very traditional changes. So there's a nice variety of different chords that we can use bebop scales over. So for this particular episode, we are going to take a look at the first 8 bars of In a Mellow Tone, and we're going to use some of these 5-note segments. So let's dive right into example number 1. So what we're doing in example number 1 is we're using 5-note segments descending. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to move them all over the different chord tone landscape. So it's going to be important that you've done what I asked you to do last week and practice a whole bunch of bebop scales starting on each chord tone, because now we're actually putting it into action and I'm asking you to play a bunch of different chord tones on the fly. So we're going to be starting some from the root, some from the 3rd, some from the 5th, and some from the 7th or the 6th, depending on what type of chord that we're playing over. So let's take a look at the first couple of measures in example 1. So what I'm doing is, in the first measure, I'm starting on the third, and then I'm coming all the way down to the seventh using that 5-note segment. In the next measure, I'm starting on the seventh, and I'm coming all the way down to the third. And then in measure 3, which is a major chord, I'm starting on the sixth, and that's going to bring me all the way down to the third. In the next measure, I'm jumping up to the root and coming down to the fifth. So they're all descending, and they're all 5-note segments starting on 1. And the nice part about this is that it gives you one beat of rest at the end of the measure to prepare for the next measure that's coming up. So let's check out what example number 1 sounds like. So you can hear there's a lot of chromaticism in that, but it's not in every measure. And that's kind of the cool thing about these 5-note segments, is that sometimes we don't actually use that chromaticism. Like if you think about a major chord coming down from the third, you're actually not going to use that passing tone, and that's all right. We don't always have to hit that thing over the head. We're just trying to develop some flexibility. All right, so example number 2 just flips example number 1 on its head, and we do ascending 5-note segments. So if you look at the first measure of example number 2, I'm starting on the third, going up to the seventh. Look at measure 2, I'm starting on the fifth, going up to the root. Measure 3, I'm starting on the fifth, going up to the root. Next measure is third, going up to the sixth. So really, I'm trying to be flexible. I'm trying to start on all the different chord tones and really give myself a chance to get used to these 5-note segments and what it feels like to freely choose between all these different chord tones. That's really the important part, is developing that flexibility, not always starting on the root or the third or the fifth or the seventh. Whatever you reach for, you want to try to break that habit and start on something different. All right, so let's check out what example number 2 sounds like. This is ascending 5-note segments based off of all the chord tones. All right, so you can hear that has a completely different texture to it simply because we are ascending instead of descending. All right, now example number 3, you guessed it, we're going to combine ascending and descending to form a little bit of a more natural sounding texture in this particular one. So I'm still doing the same thing. I'm still doing those 5-note segments, still using the same rhythmic layout and still using all the same concepts, but now I'm just challenging myself to go in a different direction from time to time. And what you will notice is that I don't always switch between ascending and descending in every measure. I just want to make sure that I have a healthy mix of both. So don't worry about like, okay, every measure I must switch back and forth between ascending and descending. It doesn't have to be like that. Just start to do what comes naturally to you and what you think sounds best melodically. That's the whole key to this. There's never really a hard and fast rule. We just want to mix both of them freely. Let's check out what exercise number 3 sounds like. I just love the sound of that chromaticism in there, especially over this tune. This is such a nice tune to practice these devices over. These chord changes are just perfection, in my opinion, and this is one of the most swinging tunes that's ever been written. So, hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. If you've got any questions, leave them for me in the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group. That's kind of the best way to get in touch and ask a question so that everybody else can hear the answer too. And if you're not a member of that, just type that into the search box in Facebook, request to be let in, and you will be in. Remember to get the PDFs, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and sign up to pledge your $3 a month. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I hope everybody is well out there, and we'll see you next week with some brand new episodes. Have a good one. Bye.